Hi, in this lesson we'll be seeing about autoconfig. First we'll see what are context files, how many context files are there and what is the location of a context file, what is the purpose of the context file. Then we'll see what is autoconfig and what happens when you run autoconfig exactly and what are the scenarios you use autoconfig. Then we'll run autoconfig with an example on how it actually helps you manage the configuration of your business suite. Then we'll see what is the location of the autoconfig log file. First, we need to understand about context files. In the file system lesson, you would have heard about the word called In the file system chapter, you would have heard about the context file. But what is exactly context file? A context file is a repository of environment specific details in Oracle Business Suite. So what does it mean exactly? So there might be several important environment specific details or configurations which are there in a business suite. And what Oracle has done is, though there are several configuration files across the file system, they made one file called the context file as a repository of all these configurations. So which means I've got, let's say for example, 100 configuration files with different parameters. And if totally, for example, out of the 100 configuration files, I've got, let's say 1000 configuration parameters which can be modified, changed based on my requirement in the application. So what Oracle has done is they created something called a context file which contains all these 100 configuration specific parameters. So it is an XML based repository. And remember that there are two context files in Oracle Business Suite. One is in database tier and one in the application tier. The naming convention of the context file is sid_hostname.xml or contextname.xml. There are two ways to edit the context file. One, you can edit directly using VA because it's simple XML file which you can edit directly, or you can also edit through Oracle Applications Manager through the front end. Oracle obviously recommends you to modify the parameters using Oracle Applications Manager, but of course you can use VA as well. To access the context file, you can directly use the environment variable $context_file. And autoconfig is going to use this context file to manage the entire application tier configuration. So what does autoconfig do exactly? That we'll be seeing in the next slides. So the locations of the context files in application tier is in inst_top appl admin and sid_hostname.xml. Whereas coming to database tier, it is located in Oracle Home appctl sid_hostname.xml. Now, what is autoconfig? Autoconfig is basically a utility used by apps DBA to manage the application's configuration. We can run autoconfig on both database and application tiers. And what is the responsibility of autoconfig is, when any of the changes are done to the context files, it is the responsibility of autoconfig to make sure that these changes which are done in the context files are propagated across the file system. For example, I'll say that a is a parameter which is related to some timeout parameter or some other value. So a is equal to 10, for example. And this specific a equal to 10 parameter is used in some 10 different configuration files. Usually if you have to modify this a equal to 10 to a equal to 20, then you have to modify in all these 10 configuration files. But since all these parameters have been consolidated in a repository XML, that is a context file, what you do as an apps DBA is you modify this parameter a equal to 10 to a equal to 20 only in the context file. And once you modify it in the context file, you run autoconfig. And autoconfig, what it will do is it will check the changes in the context file and it will take this change and it will propagate this change across all the other configuration files automatically. So the apps DBA does not have to really update any configuration files across the file system because there will be thousands of configuration files. So the responsibility of modifying the configuration files automatically is for autoconfig. And what you have to do is to simply update required parameter in the context file and run the autoconfig script. The autoconfig is run by using adautocfg.sh command. Some of the examples of what you can change. For example, the concurrent processing log and out location is based on an environment variable called applcsf, and that can be modified using the context file and run autoconfig. EBS URL, for example, you got a new load balancer, you want to change the EBS entry point or EBS URL, then you can change it. Similarly, the web entry protocol, for example, I want to change from HTTP to HTTPS. Yes, still I can update it in the context file and run autoconfig. Then the session timeout, which is there in release 12.1, discoverer URLs, or the WebLogic admin console access. We'll be seeing this one as an example now. So how to run autoconfig? So once you make the changes in the context file, you have to run the autoconfig. And remember, sometimes during some important patches such as ADTXK patches, we'll be seeing about the ADTXK patches in the ADOP chapter. And when you apply these ADTXK type of patches, autoconfig is run automatically. And also, if you are applying any release update patches, for example, you are applying the 12.2.10 release update, and you are currently on, let's say, 12.2.5. When you are applying release 12.2.10, usually the autoconfig is run as part of the patch itself. So only under specific conditions, you actually run the autoconfig on DB tier. And that will be seeing in the next lesson, what is the purpose of running autoconfig on the DB tier and how to do it. We have to see an example now on what is a context file. We'll open the context file, we'll go through the context file, we'll change a parameter, we'll run the autoconfig, and we'll see whether it is able to propagate these changes from the context file to all other configuration files in the file system. So now this is my EBS node and this is a Vision instance. So I'm going to log in as Oracle user first. And what I'll do is I'll go to my base location, set the environment of run file system, done. So now what I'll do is check the location of the context file. As I told you, it is there in the inst top appl admin. So try to open the context file. So these are all the configuration parameters of the entire file system. So whatever are the configuration parameters that are there in all the configuration files across the file system, all of them have been consolidated into one single repository file, that is the context file. So now, for example, there is a parameter called WebLogic admin console access nodes. This WebLogic admin console access nodes shows the list of IPs which are allowed to access the WebLogic admin console. This is one of the security features in the latest releases of Oracle Business Suite. And remember that only these specific IPs can be allowed to open the admin console or to access the admin console. Now, if any of the user is trying to access from a different IP, then the WebLogic console cannot be accessible. Now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this parameter in the context file and then I'm going to run the autoconfig. But how do we verify whether this change, what I'm doing here, has been propagated across the file system? So to verify that, what I'll do is I'll take one configuration file as an example. I'm logging in again into another terminal, open, set the environment first. Now I'll go to something called EBS domain home. And under EBS domain home, there is config directory and there is something called config.xml. So the config.xml, what I'll do now is first I'll take a backup of the config.xml. Config.xml and config.xml before. Now I'll open the config.xml and search for filter. So here, if you see the IP address, the filter rule which is there here, what it's showing is here the list of IP addresses which can access the 7001, which is the WebLogic admin console port. And if you open the context file, you can see the same value here. So the actual configuration file which requires that specific parameter is this one. But the same parameter is there in the context file as well. So now what I'll do is first I'll change in the context file and I'll run autoconfig. And when I do that, it should update this file automatically. And that is the responsibility of autoconfig. So now let us try to see a simple grep command, grep 192 and config.xml. I'm not sure if it's okay. Yeah, so I think we'll try to search for grep connection, or we'll search with 7001, I think. Sorry, there are a lot of entries. So we'll search for 192.168. Yeah, so this sounds good. So now what I'll do is I'm going to change this 192.168.0.0 by 24. I'm going to change it to one specific IP. So what I'll do is, there are two ways to change it, as I told. One is from the backend through VI simple editor, search for console and simply edit the value in the VI editor. This is the easiest method, but I'm going to show you the other method as well, how to do it from the front end. For that, what you have to do is, this is your front end. Log in as any of the user which is having the required privileges. Once you log in, you should be able to see something called Oracle or System Administration. So this is System Administration. And here you have Oracle Applications Manager. Oracle Applications Manager is something similar to Oracle Enterprise Manager. You know that using Oracle Enterprise Manager, we usually manage database or Fusion middleware or any of the components. Similarly, Oracle Applications Manager is used to manage some of the configuration of Oracle eBusiness Suite. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to any of the locations first. Go to sitemap and Autoconfig. And when you go to Autoconfig screen, you can see that there are basically two context files. One is applications, one is database. So what I'll do is I'll click on edit parameters of the applications one. Now at the top you can see search. I'm going to click on search and I'm going to search for console. And now you can see that there is a parameter list of external hosts SWS admin console access nodes, and this is a parameter. So what I'll do is I'll change this parameter to 10. Done. Now save it. So it is asking for any comments. For WebLogic security, say OK. So the configuration options have been saved to the context file. Now you can run autoconfig and restart services to make sure these settings change effect. Click on OK. Now what I'll do is I'll go to the backend. Remember, it is strongly recommended to shut down the services of the application tier while you're running autoconfig. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run ad stopall.sh and stop the services first. So all the services have been stopped enough. So now what I'll do is I have to run autoconfig. So the script to run autoconfig is ad auto cfg.sh. It is located in admin scripts home, but of course you can run from anywhere as well. So I'm going to run it. Give apps password. Remember that the database should be always up and running while running autoconfig, and only the application tier services should be stopped. The database should be always up and running. The autoconfig usually takes around 5 to 10 minutes of time. And at the top you can see the log file location as well. So this is the log file. So if you see here, it is connecting to the database. So make sure that the database is always up and running. So what this will do is it will first check the context file, what are the changes, and then it will go to each important product top and it will modify the configuration of all the product tops. and all the other configuration files across the file system. So the autoconfig is now completed successfully. Now what we'll do is we'll verify the config.xml, that is the configuration file of the WebLogic, whether the change has reflected here automatically or not. So now let's run it. Grep. Yes, as you can see here, what I've done is I've basically updated the parameter in the context file and I've run the autoconfig. And when I did it, the autoconfig automatically updated all the other configuration files with that change. As you can see here, I have updated this parameter in the context file, but now it is reflecting even in the config.xml as well. So this is just only one of the examples, and you can modify or hundreds of similar configuration parameters in the context file to make sure that the autoconfig propagates all the changes to the entire file system. In the next lesson, we'll be seeing the concepts of running autoconfig on the DB tier.